One reason why residents in Heath Street don't like the cycleway is because they think it makes driving in and out of their driveways a bit riskier. Well, let's just draw up some diagrams and step through this and see if this is true. So here's a very basic diagram of a street. You can see the blue bits are the houses, the grey bits are the road and the driveway, and the green bit is the verge before the cycleway was installed, and the light grey bit is the footpath. Now let's add some parked cars on both sides of the road out on the street, and we'll also stick in two residents that have parked in their driveways, one facing forward and one facing reverse. Now up the hill we have an intrepid cyclist riding on the road. So they're coming at these drivers from the right hand side, and the resident that has reversed into the driveway has decided they're going to pull out. Now that yellow dot is about where their head would be in their car. So let's just have a look at their field of view as they get out, come out of their driveway, and you can see if there's parked cars on either side, their field of view is going to be constrained, particularly if there's tall SUVs or vans parked there. If they have their nose in not out on the road, they're not going to see the cyclist approaching from their right. And it's not until they get the front of their car well out on the road that their field of view opens up far enough for them to be able to see to the right. And look, we know that the way our eyes work, would actually, the driver would have to turn their head, right to their right in order to really properly see that cyclist approaching. And so the issue you have at that point is what you call a saccade, and a saccade is what you might call a blink and you miss it. Now our brains are habituated to seeing cars and trucks and buses and stuff. So if there was a car approaching from their right, the driver's brain would process and go, "Whoop! There's a car. Hit the brakes. Don't pull out." But cyclists and motorcyclists, most drivers' brains just don't process them. They just blank them out completely. And this is why motorcyclists are really quite scathing of a lot of drivers, because they just don't see them. It's where Smidsy comes from. "Sorry, mate, I didn't see you." And it's where a driver just is completely oblivious to the presence of a motorcyclist, hits them and puts them in hospital or puts them in the grave. And cyclists have exactly the same problem. So, that is an issue. Now, what happens if we put in a nice bright green cycleway up the road and move the parked cars out a little bit? Well, here comes the same resident. They're driving out, and you can see, they've got this massive field of view now because there's no parked cars obscuring their view of a cyclist coming up the cycleway. Isn't that nice? And so yes, when they do get across the cycleway and they're in between the parked cars, they've still got this issue of a very limited field of view, but it's no different whether the cycleway is there or not. It's the parked cars that are going to be the issue, particularly tall parked cars like four-wheel drives and things like that. Now let's assume we've got a car approaching from the right. They're also coming up the hill, and obviously the resident pulling out is not going to be able to see that car. And in that position, they'll have to keep creeping out in order to see it. But let's assume the driver coming up the hill has got a brain in their head and they're not tick-tocking on their phone or something like that, and they're going to see that car pulling out. Now, what would you do in that situation? I mean, what I would do is I would see a car pulling out and I'd go, I don't think they've seen me. I'm going to slow down and I'm going to be prepared to brake just in case they pull out. And, this happens reasonably often, where I have to come to a complete stop to allow someone to come out of their driveway because they haven't seen me. So this risk of a collision happening is completely removed if the drivers coming up the hill are first paying attention. Okay, I know that's difficult these days with mobile phones and distractions, but the second thing you can do is you can slow them down to the point where, if they do see a car coming out at the last moment, they can smack on the brakes and they're going to pull up before there's a crash. The issue is if they're coming up the hill at 50, 60, 70 kilometres an hour, and they're going to have absolutely no hope to react and stop in time if a resident creeps out. But if they're coming up at 30 kilometres an hour, braking distance for most modern vehicles is so short, even if they're at the rear of a parked car, and that's when they see the nose of the resident come out, they're probably still going to have time to pull up, but without hitting the car. So, yeah, sightlines are an issue, parked cars are an issue, but bring the speed down and you get rid of most of the problem. And I think a lot of the residents would probably appreciate living in a quieter street where you don't have cars just racing up and down all the time. Right, now let's fast forward to now, and a bike lane, we've got the bike lane there, and let's take out the car parking. So what happens now? Well, the residents have a fantastic field of view up and down the street where they can see cars approaching from either direction. They can see cyclists coming up the hill on the cycleway. They can even see kids going downhill on the cycleway if they decide to do that. But the entire problem is removed. So it's just kind of baffling that council just hasn't stepped through this and gone, well, that just kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Now, let's just quickly cover one of my favourite bugbears, which is people driving front end into their driveways and then reversing out again. So here we've got the resident next door. They're reversing out. Obviously, the driver's head's on the other side of the car. Now, our heads cannot rotate 360 degrees. We don't have eyes in the back of our head. So this guy's reversing out. They're looking over their right shoulder, and they've got a very limited field of view here because obviously there's a parked car there. Now, they might have a reversing camera, but even that reversing camera is going to have a limited field of view. Okay, modern cars like Teslas have got cameras on all the corners, and that would actually show you what's coming up from either side and gives you a fantastic view all around the car. And if they've got autonomous driving and stuff, then car might also automatically brake if it sees a car or a cyclist approaching and they think there's an impact. Now, what does the driver have to do next? Well, they have to swivel their head from the right hand side all the way around to their left, so they can now look over their left shoulder to see if there's anyone coming up the hill. And of course, if there's a parked car there, they're not going to see anything coming up the hill. Car, bus, truck, cyclist, someone on a scooter, no matter what. Now, of course, what do you do in these situations? Well, you normally rapidly move your head from left to right to left to right. So you're looking this way for a brief moment, and then that way for a brief moment, checking that there's nothing coming. And of course, we're back to this issue of the saccade. The faster you do that, the less likely it is you're going to see a cyclist or a motorcyclist approaching. So even when you get the car, the back of the car all the way out, so finally you can see up the road, by this stage, well, it's probably too late, and you've just impacted with a cyclist or a motorcyclist, and that's all very bad, and someone's in hospital. Now, how do I reverse into my driveway? And I'm going to put this in here because clearly some people don't know how to do this. So I'm driving up the hill towards my house, and what am I doing? Well, I'm scanning the footpath, and in this case the cycle path as well, to my left, because I'm pulling into my driveway on the left, and I want to see, is there anyone on the footpath that's walking, scootering, cycling, someone with a pram, walking the dogs, whatever, who will be at risk when I want to reverse into my driveway a couple of houses up. And what do I do if I see someone on the footpath or someone in the cycleway? Well, I get to my driveway and I hit the brakes and I stop and I sit there in the street and I wait for those people to clear my driveway. And then once I can see them go past, I reverse in. And okay, you've got to have a certain level of competence to be able to reverse your car, but we all have to do this to pass our driving test, so I'm sure everybody is capable of doing this. And particularly again with reversing cameras and wing mirrors on both sides and all that kind of good stuff these days, this isn't super hard. And as long as you've done that scan of the footpath and all the rest of it as you're driving up to make sure there's no one there, then you've got almost no risk of reversing over someone as you're driving into your driveway. Look, it's always possible. You might have some wingnut on that decides to drive up the footpath on a electric motorbike at 60 kilometers an hour, and they're going, they come at so fast that you don't see them, and bang, there's a collision. I mean, but that's going to be rare as hen's teeth because just typically doesn't happen. But I could think of a catastrophic scenario where it would happen. But anyway, hopefully, this just explains, why the cycleway is good, because essentially, just to recap on this, yeah, a car-on-car crash is annoying. At low speed, you're going to be in the panel shop, you're going to have, some deaded panels that need beating out and some painting that needs doing and blah, blah, blah. But that's a completely different matter from running over a human being and putting them in hospital potentially with life-changing injuries. So yeah, the we've dramatically reduced the risk of a resident pulling out and hitting a cyclist or a motorcyclist, I guess, coming up the hill if we do this, cycleway and remove the parking. And the risk of a resident impacting on a car coming up or down the hill has probably increased slightly, but because the road is narrower. However, like I said, that can be mitigated by reducing the speed on Heath Street. Knock it down from 50 k's to 30 k's. Put in, some kind of traffic management stuff that will force people to go up the street at 30 kilometres an hour or lower, or come down the street. And that way, even if there is a bingle, it's going to be at such low speed, it's not going to do a lot of damage. But in most cases, you'll probably avoid the crashes because people will be able to brake in time. So why council wants to pull the cycleway out to fix this? It's like, I don't know if they've really thought through the risks and analysed them properly and thought about how they can remediate them.